Coming up, the sponsors call it a celebration of history. Others call it a rewrite. The dance that celebrates 150 years since South Carolina tried to secede, and the failure to remember why. 150 years ago today, a group of Southerners, fed up with Northern opposition to slavery, voted to make South Carolina the first state to secede from the United States of America. Tonight, the Confederate Heritage Trust of Charleston, South Carolina, will host a $100 per head Secession Ball to celebrate the signing of a document that led to the Civil War. At our number 2 story tonight, a new chapter in the long and dubious history of Confederate nostalgia. Today, South Carolina kicks off 4 years of celebrations to honor a war that killed 2% of the entire U.S. population. Back in 2007, State's General Assembly set aside $65,000 and appointed a commission to commemorate secession. Festivities began this morning with the unveiling of a monument at the site where, in 1860, a group unanimously approved a declaration to secede from the Union. In his speech at the event, Charleston Mayor Joe Riley noted the connection between secession and slavery, which evoked a "you lie" from a crowd member. Minimizing the connection between secession and slavery has long been a strategy of civil rights opponents and Confederate apologists. Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour said recently that the civil rights struggles in Mississippi during the 1960s were, quote, not that bad. According to Sons of Confederate Veterans President Mark Simpson, tonight's gala has nothing to do with slavery. He insists the point is to, quote, celebrate the courage and integrity of 170 men who signed their signatures to the Article of Secession, the courage of men to do what they think is right. So, what principles were these secessionists fighting for? Their God-given right to own slaves. The Ordinance of Secession says, quote, a geographical line has been drawn across the Union, and all the states of the north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of the President of the United States whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. As part of their protest tonight, the NAACP will be holding a viewing and discussion of D.W. Griffith's 1915 film Birth of a Nation, which portrayed the Ku Klux Klan as heroes. At a press conference on Friday, South Carolina NAACP President Lonnie Randolph said, "We are not opposed to observances. We are opposed to disrespect. This is nothing more than a celebration of slavery."
To civil war. It's the start of this country's deadliest war, an event to be celebrated with a ball that will include a play, a dinner, and dancing. Thomas Heitner is a member of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans, and Eugene Robinson is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC analyst. Let me go to Mr. Heitner. Sir, tell me about why you would celebrate at a ball the passage of the secession ordinance by the South Carolina legislature.
Well, obviously, Chris, first of all, I'm not celebrating the ball. I'm not at the ball. I'm in front of a TV camera in Nashville, Tennessee. But the SCV certainly supports the right of the people of South Carolina to celebrate secession, as our ancestors supported their right to secede. Why would I support it? For the very simple reason that we have freedom to peaceably assemble in this country. I believe we still have that.
Well, the website for the Secession Gala tonight advertises a 45-minute theatrical play reenacting the signing of the original Ordinance of Secession, and says that the ticket cost also includes dinner and dancing. And you say that, well, make your judgment, sir. You're on the show here to talk about it. Do you think it's an appropriate event?
I don't think it's an inappropriate event, if that's your real question. I assume it's appropriate. I assume it's properly planned. I assume it's well done. Had I been invited, I might well have attended. I see no reason not to celebrate things that our ancestors did 150 years ago. But by the same token, obviously not everyone agrees with that, or we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Yeah, I know. Well, let me go to Gene Robinson. I guess the question is was it a good thing that South Carolina led the movement towards secession in the Confederacy?
Well, of course not. Of course
was that a good thing?
No, it wasn't a good thing, and it was an illegal act. And the illegality of that act was, in fact, litigated by the Civil War. I mean,
right.
You know, if this was not something to celebrate, it would be like celebrating some some big terrorist attack or something like that, which in fact there was. 150 years ago, there was a terrorist attack against Fort Sumter that began the Civil War. I mean, so no, it's not a good idea to celebrate secession. It is a celebration of slavery because that's what the Civil War is about. And by the way, I'm a proud native of South Carolina. Somehow my invitation to the secession ball must have gotten lost in the mail. But do they have the right to do it? Of course they have the right to do it. We do have free assembly in this country, but it's not a particularly.
You know, some people would say my son Thomas is an actor, but we went out to one of these reenactments out in the country, one of the battlefields. I think they're great to do. I think it's fine. I mean, as a Northerner, I think it's fine that people play the South and somebody plays the North and they reenact the courage of those soldiers, the actual courage of the actual soldiers. I can understand celebrating the courage wherever it is, most places, not in some places. But why would you celebrate a decision, a political decision to break up the Union of the United States?
In the first place, Chris, if I may, that was an act of immense political courage. To leave the Union was not an act of rebellion, that has often been called. It was an effort to leave. And they tried to leave peacefully. Mr. Lincoln did not allow that, and that later caused a war. I disagree completely with Mr. Robinson's comparison of it to an act of terrorism. It was not. It was simply an act of political courage and political will to try to separate themselves from a Union government that was going in completely the wrong direction, as they understood it at the time. Now, I would agree with him that the Civil War settled the matter, and so no one tries to secede anymore. But by the same token, the litigation was never conducted. Never was it taken to court, especially to the Supreme Court. Never was it even debated carefully in legislative venues. It was fought, and cold steel and hot lead settled the question. The question settled. Make no mistake, the North won. Was
Mr. Robinson correct? I just want to interrupt you a little bit. Was he right in saying the war was over slavery?
I don't believe so, but by the same token, I understand that many people do believe so. Our Commander-in-Chief, Mr. Michael Givens, recently appealed to Mr. Al Sharpton, who said some extremely disrespectful things about the Confederacy on a recent TV program, that we should be beyond the point of having these name-calling contests, just as we're past the point of shooting at one another. We ought to be able to sit down and respectfully disagree and explore the positions of one another.
Chief?
Well, that's, with all respect, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous. If it were not for slavery, there would not have been the Civil War. There were 50 years of fights and battles and tensions over slavery that led up to secession and the Civil War. That was the issue, and states' rights was the wrapping and the bow that was, in which the package of slavery was presented, but in fact, that was the issue. It's very clear. I mean, there's no other reading of history. And
well, the immediate result of the Civil War is the passage of the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery. I mean, I don't know how you can, Mr. Hyder. Why do you deny? Let me ask you one question. Last question of the night. Why do you deny the Civil War was over slavery? Are you offended by that charge, or what? You think that's not a reasonable assumption?
I do. Abraham Lincoln was quite clear in his first inaugural address that he fully supported slavery. He signed the original 13th Amendment, which guaranteed slavery. The original Confederacy was formed by 7 states. Lincoln's invasion of the South took 6 more out of the Union. No, it didn't start over slavery. Before it was over, was slavery an issue? Absolutely. Was, in fact, slavery an issue from the beginning? In part, sure. John Brown came from Kansas and tried to start a slave insurrection in Virginia before the war. So was slavery an issue? Absolutely. Slavery was the great moral issue of that century, and it was a great moral evil.
What side would you have been on? What side would you have been on in that fight to free the slaves? On the side of the slaveholders or the slaves?
It was not a fight to free the slaves. That's the fundamental misassumption you're making. The war didn't even involve slavery until 1863. No, I'm talking about John Brown.
Was John Brown a bad guy or a good guy?
John Brown was a bad guy. John Brown was a terrorist.
Okay, thank you.
And had I found myself alive in those days, I hope to pray to God I would have fought the way my ancestors did for the South.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hyder, for joining us and being so forthright. Thank you, Gene Robinson, for being on the right side.